my name's Claire. A lot of you probably know me. In fact, I believe I know all of you. I'm going to be talking about zombies tonight. As you probably know by now, I'm obsessed with zombies. Somewhat unhealthily, especially for a biologist. Not the most scientifically solid concept. But they've become a bit of a trope in cinema in recent years. We kind of switched from the obsession with vampires in every single way, including in, shitty teenage romances. And one thing nearly all of these movies have in common is some way of transmitting the zombie infection, power, whatever. So I'm going to talk about the different mechanisms, usually pathogens, which are disease-causing particles, that people use to start zombie apocalypse in their movies or books. I've found examples of lots of things, so if you like zombies, come talk to me afterwards. Okay, so my first slide is just basically to stop certain people lynching me. So there's been a pretty long-standing argument on the interwebs and movie buffs, etc., as to whether zombies are undead or infected or whatever. For the purpose of this talk, I'm going to assume that all zombies are safe, whether they be infected, whether they be undead, and also for that purpose, I'm going to be discussing a lot of movies where you wouldn't really consider the people zombies, but more, maniacs or people who, people who are driven insane for some reason or another, or just become homicidal or gross. Necrosis tends to make people like zombies, so that's what I'm talking about. Okay, so first up, I'm going to talk about viruses. So viruses are seen in the majority of these kinds of movies. They're used in just notable examples: 28 Days and Weeks Later, Dawn of the Dead, The Walking Dead. Pretty much any modern zombie movie will use a virus. Oh gosh, just go back on that one. No, crap. I can edit that out. Okay, so the reason we like viruses is because they're really fast. Most people know what a virus is. And scientifically, they hijack the cell's machinery in order to reproduce. So basically, what a virus does is once it enters the cell, it injects DNA, and the DNA is transcribed and translated into the necessary protein to create new viruses. So basically, you're creating a cellular zombie, taking it over, turning it into its own death, basically. The main problem with this is, of course, that viruses aren't particularly complex. Most viruses would not be able to cause the kind of changes in behavior we see in a lot of these zombie movies. They certainly would be able to sustain a body, especially in movies like World War Z, where circulation is supposed to stop entirely. There's no way that a virus could actually continue to keep a body moving. And yeah, most side effects that look like, some kind of rage or violence are usually due to decay of neurons in your brain or some kind of mental damage, which really means that you have to still be alive for them to work. So in like Dawn of the Dead and The Walking Dead, where people actually have to die to become a zombie, certainly not going to work. But there are some pretty cool examples in biology of viruses that give you kind of zombie-like effects. Two of my favorites are rabies and Ebola. So rabies is a virus most of us know about, sprayed by most mammals. Basically, it spreads through saliva, check number 1 on the zombie hit list, and it causes people to basically go a little bit crazy and try to bite things, largely due to their mouth drying up. People become scared of water because they can't swallow, things like that. So it gives some pretty cool symptoms which could be associated with being zombies. In fact, in World War Z, the book, the disease was first referred to as African rabies, which is mass rabies infection of humans. Ebola, I've included largely because it's really, people talk about it a lot now. Ebola also has neurological effects in that basically it starts to liquefy your organs, including your brain, so you start to go a little bit crazy. So it's described as symptoms similar to dementia. Conceivably, some people could become violent under those circumstances. And then you become basically a blood bag, an exploding blood bag in the final stages of the disease. you hemorrhage from everywhere, and that's a really good way to spread the disease, makes it seem a little bit zombie-ish. Yes?
Firstly, just to clarify, do you mind people asking questions during this?
Oh, go right ahead.
With Ebola, do people, once they're started, as you said, having your brain be in, serious damage, is it possible to recover physiologically from that point?
If you recover from that stage, you will have brain damage, basically.
There's been one account of someone recovering, but it was far
from
before the brain hemorrhage stage.
You basically get, you can get some disorientation. It really depends on the person. But some people will just go kind of fluey, bloody, coma death. Whereas some people will actually walk around for a bit and be just disoriented, a bit angry, personality change, things like that. And then you get bloody death. But it really depends on the person, and the problem is we know so little about Ebola, despite it being known for 40 years or so.
So for those who've survived, is it generally just sort of fluey and then better? Or?
It honestly depends. It's usually a pretty severe illness. Okay. So next up, I want to just say a quick something. Since most people recognize that bacteria and viruses are two of the main pathogens that humans deal with, it's worth mentioning that in especially modern zombie fiction, whether it be movies, books, anything, bacteria just aren't mentioned. Which I think is particularly weird, because next to viruses, bacteria are a great solution for causing some pretty nasty zombie-like infections. So first we've got treponema palladium, which causes syphilis. Most of us know about syphilis as causing you to go basically mad. It can also cause your face to basically degrade and go all blue. And when venereal syphilis was first introduced to Europe, people were reporting people clawing their eyes out in pain in the streets because of the burning sensation that was caused when this was first introduced. It's kind of mellowed out because you don't survive that to spread it. So that doesn't happen these days, but it's a worthwhile example. You see someone, going mad and tearing their eyes out in the street, they could conceivably become violent and aggressive, and, given the right set of circumstances, that's enough to look like a zombie. We've also got Staphylococcus aureus here, which some of you may know is the pathogen behind MRSA. So when Staphylococcus aureus becomes drug resistant, that makes it really, really, really hard to treat. And part of the reason I think that bacteria haven't been included for so long in literature relating to zombies is that we think, I've got a bacterial infection, I'll just have an antibiotic. Problem with antibiotic resistance, you get these nasty old diseases coming back. And staph is particularly nasty because it can cause your flesh to be basically eaten off. If anyone's seen the movie Cabin Fever, it's about a bunch of teenagers out in the woods having a fun summer camp, and they all get infected by flesh-eating bacteria. And their flesh peels off their bones, and by the time you get to the end of the movie, they look like zombies. They're just, they don't have the mindless, shambling, brain-melting ability. So that one also is worth considering. There's other things like leprosy that give you some really nasty necrotic flesh. There's meningococcal, which can cause some pretty bad neurological symptoms before you die, things like that. The only really well-known example I could find of bacteria being used in a kind of zombie movie is in Warning Sign, which was published in 1985. So that's how long we're talking. I actually watched this for the first time last night. Pretty damn good. But in this, basically, the original rage virus they found, the genes from that get spliced into a common bacterium, which there's some bad science there. And this bacterium infects a whole bunch of people in the laboratory. Laboratory goes into quarantine, and then they basically look like they're dead, actually more of a coma, so they're not technically undead. They come back and fly into a maniacal rage. What's kind of different about regular zombies for these guys is that they still recognize people, they can still talk, but pretty good example of bacteria causing zombies. Okay, why doesn't it? Okay, so new example here. Parasitic animals and protozoa. So a lot of you all know about tapeworms, microscopic organisms that live inside you that are what we call eukaryotic. Basically means their cells have all the components ours do. And that's things like malaria. So we've got a few examples of these being used to create zombies or similar organisms. One of my favorite examples parasites, so mirrograms, were basically tapeworms that have been used to, they've been genetically engineered to produce all the drugs you need instead of your regular medications to monitor your health and basically produce a signal in your feces that your doctor can pick up on and diagnose you straight away. They're massively genetically engineered. But then the tapeworms start to become intelligent and start to their own bodies, people start attacking each other, and if one tapeworm that becomes sentient, gets close to another, then that one starts to become sentient. There's all this blood on the road. It's pretty fantastic. I love it. Another one, which is a more recent one, the TV series actually started last month. It's called The Strain. It's a collaboration between Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan. Started off as a trilogy of books. And the monsters in this are technically vampires, but I kind of think they're on the fence between vampires and zombies, because they don't talk, they're largely not intelligent, and they just kind of mindlessly hunt humans. And they're caused by a threadworm, basically, which is bloodborne, gets into your blood, and starts to make all these morphological changes. Your genitalia fall off, your nose falls off, and your larynx. The reason they can't talk is that your larynx kind of folds in on itself and becomes a giant sucker that shoots out about 6 feet from your mouth so you can suck blood.
Now that's science.
It is very. Well, it's a very interesting example of fiction in that it starts off really sciencey, and then by the end of it becomes totally religious. It's a really interesting thing. And not in a bad way that you might associate with people trying to blend the two. It's actually quite interesting. So that's a really cool example of parasites. One of my favorite examples, anyone here played Halo? Any of you like the Flood? I like being the Flood when I have to play multiplayer.
You're a bad person.
I am a bad person. But the
Oh.
Flood basically, these parasitic jellyfish-like things that were used in trying to make super soldiers. This all little, I don't pay attention to this video game tutorial. I just shoot things. I just shoot things. But these basically latch onto an organism, mutate them, and basically try to infect the organism. That's all they do. Pretty much a classic example of a zombie. Now, the reason that these parasites are kind of more plausible than viruses in some ways is that they are super complex. We've got plenty of examples of parasites modifying behavior of organisms. They've got a similar cell structure to ours, so the cellular signals are more similar, and they have a longer lifespan, so they kind of hang around a little longer. But the problem is that they tend to be fairly slow, with the exception of malaria, and again, difficult to spread, exception of malaria. Malaria is spread by mosquitoes, it's bloodborne, tends to be fairly fast. Most other examples, really slow. Another example would be Chagas disease, which is spread by little microscopic parasite, and that's spread by a bug, so it spreads fairly quickly, but it causes chronic illness, and it takes a long, long time to take hold. In fact, it's suspected that that's what Charles Darwin had for a good 40 years of his life. So, yeah, there's a bit of a problem with that being really slow. You tend to like zombies within a few days tops. Well, like being an interesting word to use there. Some other examples in biology would be Toxoplasma gondii, which a lot of you probably have heard of somewhere in the news. It gets brought up every so often. It's actually found in cats and in cat poop. It's a parasite that basically gets into mice, which eat the cat poop, or even rats, and causes them to have this real affinity for cats and kind of lose their inhibitions. So they're less worried about running out in the open. They like to go near cats, so they get eaten. It infects the cat, grows up in the cat, gets pooped out, infects another rat. However, somewhere along the way, it can get to humans, and it'll get into our system, and it can cause people's personalities to change, including aggression. It can cause some pretty nasty acute illness, kind of like a really bad flu. And if a woman gets infected while she's pregnant, it can cause massive retardation in the baby. The personality change is probably the most interesting thing. A lot of people are like, oh, Toxoplasma gondii made you super aggressive, because it already does in about 50% of people it infects. Then it could be a really good zombie infection. Biggest thing about that one is it already infects about 50% of the world. So, if anyone decides to modify that one, it could be a problem. Tapeworm's pretty cool. If you're really, really unlucky, they can get into your bloodstream, lay eggs in your brain, and form nice little cysts. That causes all kinds of neurological illnesses. It can make you, again, hallucinate, make you really aggressive. Just depends where the eggs end up. So that could conceivably cause some massive illness. And the Cryptopantanae wasps. These guys basically, they capture a caterpillar, they lay their eggs inside it. The egg grows up while feeding off the caterpillar, leaves as a baby wasp, and then the caterpillar follows it around, protects that wasp's egg, and if a bird comes near it, will come back up on its back legs and try to distract the bird from attacking the wasp. So basically, it creates its own little suicide minion. So if back again to humans, and we all suddenly decided to defend wasps at the cost of our own lives, it could be very messy. Okay, more parasites. So this is fungi. I was going to do plants as well, but my speech is a little long. So parasitic fungi, they're kind of less plausible than the other parasites simply because they are really, really slow and a lot easier to avoid. You can usually dodge fungus. Spores are fairly large, so most filter masks wouldn't let them through, and it's pretty hard to get you some fungal infection just because your body reacts really quickly to it. So an example of this that I could find a really good popular one, at least, is The Last of Us, which is a game that came out last year, or was it this year? It was very recent. Last year. And this uses a fungus they call cordyceps, which in The Last of Us causes massive mutations, space changing. This is the least horrors of all the zombies I can find from that. There are some nasty ones. And, they become kind of the fast zombies that you may see where instead of like the George A. Romero slow zombies that a lot of people are familiar with. So they're really freaky and probably not at all plausible because parasites, even if they could control it, they wouldn't have the amount of coordination these zombies have, especially not the sensory perception change and stuff. If they could get into your brain, conceivably they could cause all kinds of aggressive behavior. They probably could induce some kind of hunger-related issues, largely because the hunger switches in the brain are surprisingly simple. People with a single mutation can get basically a genetic condition where they start to just eat everything. There's also a syndrome called Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, which basically causes auto-cannibalism. That makes people look like zombies because they eat their own flesh, they chew, and they also they lash out at people. And that's just a single genetic mutation. So conceivably, parasites could do quite a bit. Again, example in biology, just cordyceps, which is actually called ornithocordyceps or something like that, orthocordyceps, which is a fungus that grows in ants, basically grows into the ant, and the ant gets this urge for some reason, this is in the Amazon, to climb a tree. Then it latches on with its pincers and just stays there until it dies, while the fungus grows inside it. So the fungus grows inside while this ant just latches on until it starves to death, and then rains down spores upon all its little anti brethren. And the cycle continues. And basically, the ants can continue to function fairly normally for a little while to kind of stockpile nutrients and then climb the tree. It's pretty incredible. I mean, if a fungus, insects are a pretty big jump from humans. But can you imagine if that kind of stuff would get to us? So I like that one, but because of the slowness, not the most plausible. Next, drugs. Now, drugs aren't strictly speaking a pathogen. Pathogens tend to refer to organisms or semi-organisms in the case of viruses. But they've been known to cause some pretty insane changes in behavior. We've seen them in stuff like Firefly, where they cause the Reavers, these lovely people. Basically, on a planet called Miranda, the government tried to mellow out the population to lower the crime rate. They put this drug into all the air systems. 90% of people were so chilled out they lay down and died. And 10% of people became these lovely fellows, which practice self-mutilation and will kill you, skin you, rape you, and if you're really lucky, they'll kill you before they do the rest. And so, drugs are pretty plausible because they're mind-altering. You can get drugs that cause people to do some pretty crazy stuff. Methamphetamine will cause you to claw at your face. We've all probably, heard about the munchies from marijuana. Imagine, mega munchies from genetically engineered marijuana. Just make it so hard that you start chewing on something.
That's some good chronic stuff.
Yeah, you get some really hard chronic and maybe you could get that hungry. Lace it with some ice so you start picking at your skin, you're you're all bloody and it could get nasty. Problem is, drugs aren't often contagious, with the exception of a few things like breast milk.
You can transmit certain drugs.
You can transmit certain drugs.
Oh, right. Yeah, right.
Breast milk is not a drug. Don't try it. Without permission, of course. And they have usually a short-term effect, at most a few weeks effect. Also, if you want to create a drug like that, they're a lot harder to design, I'd say, than biological organisms. Biological organisms, you can kind of just shoot radiation at until they mutate and then select out what you like. Whereas drugs, you've kind of got to sit there and fiddle with molecules, which is a lot harder than it sounds. A couple of pretty classic examples in biology of drugs being used to create zombies would be the original zombie, the voodoo zombie, where legend goes that Haitian... I've been told that witch doctor is not an offensive term, but I don't know, maybe a little bit. Where basically these Haitian shamans will go with, would somehow form black magic to bring corpses back from the dead. There's more evidence that they probably just drugged them until they were in a coma. When these people woke up, they had this kind of amnesia, this delirium, but they never really attacked anyone, so the zombie myth kind of grew from there. And one of the more recent ones, crocodiles, not that recent, it's kind of a homebrew drug that came out of Russia and is now more popular. Gives you a really cheap high, and basically a lot of people end up with massive sepsis from it. When you inject it, it kills all the flesh around it. Necrosis, of course, will cause infection, skin starts to peel off, flesh starts to fill off. There are some nasty photos on the internet. This is a tame photo for this slide, by the way.
That man needs a skincare advisor.
Oh my god. No. You should have seen the crocodile picture. Just bear with me.
Can I pull it off and be beautiful?
No, I think the problem is he pulled a little much off already.
Yeah, but there's some pretty nasty side effects, necrosis, things like that, and that combined with the aggression you get with some drugs, conceivably you could create a zombie drug, but again, getting that spread around, not that easy. Okay, so I want to give some honorable mentions to a few other mechanisms. Pathogen-wise, prions, which were used in zombie land. So I've talked about prions before in my last speech. Prions are basically a misfolded protein that usually occurs in your nervous tissue, basically really slowly causes degeneration in the brain. In zombie land, it acts way too fast for a prion. They say it's a form of mad cow disease that was in burgers and stuff, but it acts within a few days, when prions usually take 20 to 50 years. So, honorable mentions zombie land, you tried, not really, at least it was a comedy. Dawn of the Dead. This is interesting, because in Dawn of the Dead they use both a religious justification and a virus. It's always referred to as a virus in both the George A. Romero and the remake. But this phrase is always uttered when there is no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. So, props to you guys, that sounds nice and scary, and if you can bring back that many zombies, you will be a biologist in that dream. But as a biologist, I can't really speak to that one. If anyone can point out where I can find that guy. Another one I really like is genetics, which came from Hater by David Moody, where basically David Moody is just a kind of indie author. I encourage you to look him up. In the book Hater, there's 3 in the trilogy. Basically, people with a certain genetic, we'll call it a quirk, they basically, one day they just get switched on, and anyone they see that hasn't got that particular genetic quirk, they attack viciously until they kill them. They get overcome with this kind of fear, this hatred, and have to kill them. Whereas all people without this can't tell who is who until they get attacked. So that's really interesting in that it causes this massive aggression, but it's really hard to conceive of a gene that would cause that so specifically, especially considering that compared to other animals, humans can't even deal with pheromones properly. Pheromones. Yeah, most of us couldn't look at someone else and be like, you have the flu. No. It's very likely we could be like, you have a particular gene without some kind of visible sign. So.
I mean, in fairness, the phenomenon of sort of people randomly attacking each other on the street just because somebody else is slightly different is very commonly observed in Canada.
Except the thing is, except this is cultures and different people, these are people with the same feelings who attack each other for no reason.
Well, yeah, what different ice hockey teams.
Or like, you move into the real world.
Again, but that's an external marker. The hockey team is an external marker. There is no external marker here. There are people attacking each other at the same level. The point is, this happens in the whole planet all at the same time, and that just does not happen with genetics. So, honorable mention for being an interesting concept, but seriously.
But if we are going to allow ourselves to think about, like...
Zombies.
Zombies, and now we're talking about genetics, so it becomes important to be thinking along geological time.
Oh, yeah.
So if there was, like, say, a genetic basis for, I don't know, racism, it's plausible that Hater could end up happy.
That's why I kind of like the idea. I mean, you could see because the main character in these books, he ends up going and searching for his daughter because he realizes that his daughter has the gene that he has, which causes him to attack his family. So he has to somehow kind of get his urges under control so he can infiltrate the population, get his daughter out before.
Are you saying this book is from the quote-unquote zombies perspective?
Yeah, except he's not a zombie. Well, it's not.
That's why the rat's a hen.
But it's a really interesting book. If you're interested in thinking about the human condition, the nature of love, all that, really interesting book. Also a gore fest, a literary gore fest, and there's supposed to be a movie coming out next year, I think, which I've been waiting for years.
I'm not seeing that with you.
Oh, okay. If anyone wants to watch zombie movies with me,
I'll see it with
no one
you.
wants to.
You can listen to the zombies. I'll go to this with pseudoscience. Sounds good?
Yes!
Okay, this is a pseudoscience.
Okay, guys, I've got one more honorable mention, then we'll open it to questions. Sound. This is another honorable mention. This actually comes from one of my favorite zombie movies of all time. This is, again, not a true zombie because they don't actually die or anything. But first, I want to talk about my favorite ridiculous example. Has anyone seen Red Dwarf yet? Yeah, Red Dwarf is a sci-fi series from 70s? 80s? 90s, really.
Oh.
Everything's that old to me. I'm a munchkin. Red Dwarf is this series about guys trapped down space with all the future technology, blah, blah, blah. Basically, the hologram in Red Dwarf, his name is Rimmer, which is funny enough, he comes into contact over radio with another hologram, and she somehow, via sound, gives him this crazy hologram virus that she has, which causes them to shoot lasers out of their eyes, and just go crazy. Like, he ends up in a big DM dress with a sock puppet, and he just goes into a massive murderous rage, which is pretty good. Crazy zombie. If anyone's seen The Crazies, it reminds me a little bit of them, but funnier. And yeah, I mean, if you're going to mess around with holograms, you may as well be messing around with holoviruses. That's slightly more plausible than pure sound because, you know, there's some kind of computer stuff going on there. I suppose you could encode something. Again, pseudoscience. Computer scientists, stop twitching. Yeah. So that one's pretty cool. But then there is my favorite example. This is a movie called Pontypool. I make as many people I know see this as possible. It's pretty brilliant. The idea behind Pontypool is that there is somehow a disease, they call it a virus in movies, but that is spread by the English language.
What?
Yeah, it's just, wait. The funny thing is, it's also set in Canada, and the day is said by the Quebecois. Which is I just want to point that out. People from Quebec, they saved the day. Well, saved the day by firebombing. Basically, it starts off with this random woman in the snow who's just kind of babbling really incoherently. And then it kind of goes from there. These guys are trapped inside a radio station as this all happens, so it kind of chronicles from a bunch of different perspectives. And what happens is basically the person starts to babble a bit, and then they can't talk anymore, and they get really confused, really disoriented, they start forgetting things, and they just start to be unable to talk. Now, I actually went and read the book because this was a really interesting concept for me. The way it's described in the book is that when these people can't talk, what they do is they try to escape, their voice tries to escape through someone else's mouth. So they rip the shit out of everyone else they see. They just, you know, they usually go and try to bite your face and, you know, get on through your mouth. And if they are unable to attack someone, they will eventually basically commit suicide. One character, she's a zombie, and the last, 3 people are trapped in the soundproof booth of this radio station. She runs up and starts bashing herself against the wall. When she can't get through, she basically explodes because the thing can't get out. And the thing is interesting, it's spread only by the English language, so the Canadians, of course, are speaking French. And there's a doctor who can speak Arabic who survives until he accidentally speaks too much English and goes insane. So, it's not really plausible, but when you consider the way people talk about subliminal messaging and all those little psychological things, that's kind of an interesting concept. And
sounds like it's supposed to be a metaphor for the irrational fear of English that people in Quebec have.
That comment has been made to me before.
Yeah, they have a government department that try to stop people using English.
Yeah, it's actually really
you the weekend.
The first thing one of the guys here said when I said, the virus is spread by English and it's set in France, he's like, oh my god, are the killer flies laws? I'm like, yeah, they saved the day. Oh.
And on that note, I have a Canadian friend who's in Quebec, and she got told off if she ever said hello first. She had to say bonjour, hello. And there are actually rules on how much bigger the French bit of the sign has to be than the English bit.
Yeah,
stop signs can't say stop, even though in France they say stop.
Yeah.
Why do they say France? Alright.
Anyway, Claire.
Yeah, so that's a really cool one. If anyone's interested in decent zombies, like I gotta say this was pretty good. And I have a copy. So
what you're saying is you're giving a voice to the movie.
Questions. Does anyone have any other movies they want me to talk about that they know of? Because I just there were vague examples. There are a lot more movies than this for each of the categories I covered.
And 10 times as many games.
Oh, and
games
so many
zombies.
books. So many books. People don't realize how big a genre zombies are in books.
Were you also really disappointed that World War Z was just a standard zombie flick with Brad Pitt?
Yes, because the book was amazing. I encourage any of you to go read the book.
It has some.
It has some problems, but the idea behind World War Z is that outbreaks have basically been going on since the start of human time, and this was an outbreak that got out of control. It's told from after the zombie apocalypse, and this guy was going around talking to all the survivors and hearing their stories and how they overcame this. There was lots of politics and military stuff. It was, but also the human side, and I found that really interesting because it was less about the zombies and more about people, and that I found really interesting.
It was about how the people killed the zombies, but
it's interesting. A lot of the books I mentioned here, the reason I like them, the reason I like zombie fiction in general, is that they're usually zombies and something. So the idea is that the zombies are this massive catalyst for a real discussion of the human condition.
Imagine doing that nowadays and it's global warming zombie. Wouldn't work.
Actually, on that note, there was a movie called The Thaw that was released in 2009.
Alright.
It was a bunch of I think it's paleontology students dig up a frozen mammoth in the Arctic. And basically this bug is released, literally an insect, which is why I can't watch that movie without going, I just think about insects. And not about zombies.
Here's the cruelty, it's not insect.
And the bugs basically, they kill everyone. Then there's some insanity, it's all a little bit. But it's basically all about how global warming is causing the melting of the ice caps. We're going to be attacked by bugs. So that's fun.
But not zombies.
Yep.
Thank you for this such a well-researched presentation. So there are two questions. The first one, which is only speculative, so there's no answer. It's more just the origins of zombies in popular culture. So if you know things like vampires, sort of go back more to traditional culture, legends and old folklore, the zombies tend to be more recent. But did zombies in pop culture come out sort of after we became more aware of disease and health and those things? So is it actually a product of our knowledge of disease than a sort of pop culture version of disease? Or do you know if it's, if you don't,
yeah. Well, strictly speaking, from what I know of the subject, again, I'm not a history student, but from what I know of the subject, from my obsession, the idea of a zombie has kind of been, indirectly not called a zombie, has been around for as long as humans have believed in magic and witchcraft.
No.
It's kind of an offshoot of a demon. It's basically a corpse brought back to life that attacks you. The word zombie, of course, came from Haitian voodoo, so that's fairly recently introduced to Western culture, at least. And yeah, I'd probably say that a lot of the examples I've used here, which are very disease-related, probably did come from modern disease. So, yeah. And I mean, zombies really didn't kick off in pop culture till George A. Romero and his amazingness came.
Flores product, 1950s American teenage culture.
Yeah.
So the second one was, with this fantastic array of diseases and health related to the zombie issue, if you're going to be imaginative and write sort of a breakthrough novel, which is going to sell millions of copies and get an extremely lucrative film contract, what's something you might think of, which involves all this knowledge of sort of health and disease, but maybe involves something which is not a zombie, sort of a new form of pop culture villains. We've got vampires, we've got zombies, we've got creature, werewolf. What would be the new creature you could think of?
I have always liked the kind of idea of the superhumans, like Khan in Star Trek. These kind of humans that being genetically engineered to be better, kind of through certain kind of eugenics programs that may be more scientifically valid than the eugenics we know, because that's all. But that's kind of cool idea. And if they were given more instinctive motivations, they would probably be motivated to destroy the rest of humanity to preserve their genes.
That's a fantastic idea. We've got the whole script there already.
Yeah.
It's like instead of the virus creating this horrible sort of flesh-eaten sort of zombie, the virus which creates sort of godlike superhumans who are beautiful.
What I would probably go with is genetically humans that are transformed by a viral vector, which they then possess and can take around, transforming the offspring of future humans if they want to. So they have to farm. Humans.
Would it just need to be systematic, or could you just mutate one master
You couldn't really mutate growing human. You would have to mutate the embryo.
Yeah, exactly.
It depends on your delivery system.
Yeah, if you have to do it body one, I think it's
no, I mean, if you deliver it via a virus, you could get the entire.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you get a virus that travels through the bloodstream and potentially.
Like
list
or something.
Well, I mean,
I think retrograde.
each of the cells has got like a little flag saying I'm part of this body.
You can, there's a
Yeah, but what if the virus also carries the...
Again, because you're very crazy about this.
The big new enemy for the new films could just be like failing to recycle or something. Wally already sort of did that.
Another great concept is, I read a short story a while ago in an anthology of post-apocalyptic fiction in which the government had basically used some kind of genetic transformation to create basically, the parole class in 1984? They basically forced that upon like the lower class, so they were basically really, really dumb. They could only perform simple like
Yeah. I was about to say Brave New World. Yeah. That wouldn't be an anthology. Brave New World's a book of its own.
No, well, I know that it's Brave New World, but I read a particular really detailed, like science-based version in the book, which is where I know from.
Brave New World's actually pretty fun.
No, Brave New World is really good. This is a more modern version. Yeah, again, it was very Brave New World ripoff, but I just remember this because I read it like last week. And it just, I mean, that seems like a really cool idea as well. Really, I think that Brave New World should be made into a big budget movie because
They did that with 1984. It did not work.
They did?
It wasn't
a good.
They also did like a Mad advertisement that worked quite well.
Oh.
Okay, and
it just makes me laugh at how hypocritical it is.
When I was back in like 6th, 7th grade, I read a book called TEEPS, and it's a parasite.
So Westerfield.
Yes.
Yeah, I've read that.
Yeah, and it's so interesting in the fact that the way it spread, if you spread it through a human to a human, then it will, unless you have a very, very, very specific genetic thing that isn't really explained, you kind of become this zombie, kill, eat, grind people into food thing.
Yeah.
But there's a certain type that spreads through cats to humans, and then it's stable, and it actually just makes you more kind of powerful, it makes you smarter, it makes you really, really, really hungry, but you can actually eat food, not humans.
Yeah. I believe that one one was kind of inspired by toxoplasma, because of course the only human transmission known there is mother to child, and that causes massive, nasty disease, and often if it's infected in the later stage pregnancy, the baby just doesn't make it. But from cats in adults, it usually causes a bit of flu at most, and then in I believe men it causes them to pay more attention, to be more sensitive and emotional. In women, it causes basically bitchiness. So I believe. But I do believe that the piece was inspired by toxoplasma, from what I've read.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he says it in the back.
Oh, one sec.
My question is, how plausible is it that something like that could be spread so quickly and have such different effects on different people?
And I think that the different effects on different people thing is probably more plausible than most of the zombies we see. Because most of the zombie movies we see, they're like 100% you get bitten, you die, and become a zombie. Whereas the different effects bit at least seems a bit more plausible. But the whole zombie aggression thing on the whole, not particularly plausible unless, bioweapons engineering is a lot more advanced than I know. Which is possible, I mean.
Just expanding on that, how long it's been a common eye thing in popular culture. One of the things that I've seen sort of in historical studies is that around the first outbreak of the Black Plague in 1348 in Western Europe, you actually saw a massive surge of interest in death, which then sort of led into the question of God and what happens to bodies, and usually with links to Revelation, the book of Revelation, corpses rising from the dead.
Yeah.
There's got a huge amount of art from that period of the so-called dance of death, where usually a skeleton, usually it's not occasionally death itself, is leading sort of the people through the streets onwards towards an inexorable demise. Which I think is just, it's not really sort of the whole flesh-eating, killing everyone zombie kind of thing, because 1300 was really into that.
That's what I was referring to earlier with the whole, as long as there's been kind of the magic kind of religion thing around, that's been talked about. I mean, corpses tend to get gross and nasty, and wouldn't it be scary if one of them woke up? People have always been worried about disease. I mean, back when leprosy was a thing, how paranoid people were, they could live in separate colonies and stuff, and that's kind of a natural progression, I think. The idea of zombies is more like humans going up against themselves. It's a larger manifestation of disease than the microbes we see. So it's been pretty well demonstrated in a lot of cultures. You get this big wave of disease, you get this obsession with death, and zombies are usually associated with that, but not called zombies. Yeah.
Well, I kind of have, this is kind of a comment, and going back to the how would you create a modern zombie thing?
Yeah, go for it.
Right?
We're not making a plan here, right?
Well, no, we're not making a plan.
No, we're making a movie or a play.
Yeah, maybe you should.
Don't worry, it's all being recorded.
Well, so earlier today, I discovered that basically, so your brain has a whole bunch of different cells, right, and they're mostly more or less specialized into different functions. And there's part of the brain which is the part that I'm really interested in, the outer layer, the new part of the brain, which is where the state of consciousness or whatever it is, well, it ought to be at least, right? Anyway,
What do we think it is?
It turns out, which is something that I learned today, which I didn't know before, that every single part of the cortex is connected to motor movement, right? Which previously I thought it was the case that you had like one section that's connected to motor command. What's interesting about that is that it's only a specific subtype of cells in the cortex that are connected to motor output, and all of the subtypes of these cells are expressing a particular biomarker. So potentially, right, we could create a virus that targets these cells based on that biomarker and knocks them out, which would do two really scary things, right? It means it disconnects the conscious part of your brain from the movement, right? So then you have the effect of a zombie in that this thing is, because you're taking out the new part of the brain, but leaving all the lower faculties
The
that
instinctive, the high
all
brain.
all that hindbrain jazz. So you've still got the aggression, you've still got the desire to eat, fight, and reproduce.
Yeah. You're just gonna aim that towards
But now the part of your brain that is in control of saying, hey, let's only walk around with clothes on while in civilized society, and let's not go and falcon punch people when we're
there's
right? Whatever, so all of that part, it's still there, but it can't talk to the motor command.
I think that's called
it's the equivalent, if you could think about that, it would be the equivalent of being roofied, but you're still moving around. No, fuck that. It's the equivalent of someone else controlling your body, right? Yeah. And you're watching the whole thing.
You're basically a puppet.
Imagine there was a cure for that.
No, there's your zombie Christian, right?
No, imagine if people woke up after that. Imagine how screwed up they would be.
I'm happy not knowing 600 points, Alex.
Locked in syndrome.
Yeah.
If you could basically have that, except then something else has hijacked the rest.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Or you could graft a really angry lizard onto your brain or something. do the flood.
Basically the side map.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
They would be so pissed.
Anyone else?
I've got one last question, which is, as somebody who's clearly watched a huge number of zombies.
Oh, so many.
How many of these films actually have a thing where somebody gets bitten and then refuses to tell anyone else that they've been bitten? Just to be
I'd say 90 to 95%.
90%.
That's not why.
Are they just the worst?
I think it's kind of just it's dramatic tension. It's one of those tropes because people like that kind of tension. I also think comment on how humans are so prone to denial and so prone to being like, oh, I'll be fine, and kind of putting themselves before the group.
It's a mad fear thing, basically.
Yeah.
Is it in most of them a guy or a girl? Because we know there's the phenomenon of guys are much less likely to go to the doctor when something's bad. Contribute to lower life expectancy.
In my experience, I'd say that it depends. I'd probably say it tends to be guys because they tend to be more stoic. Partially because there is also a trope of the women getting, their clothes torn up before they get torn apart by zombies, in which case they are definitely bitten and everyone knows it. Yeah. There's a few tropes that are kind of conflicting. I would say it's usually a guy, largely because of the macho thing, but not always. I mean, probably 70-30 guys to girls.
In these movies, it always seems to be a zombie human. You mentioned there was some people taking out a mammoth. I don't know if it's going to be a zombie mammoth.
Well, it would have been if they defrosted the whole thing.
So
there's zombie dogs in...
Zombie dogs in Resident Evil. Yeah, it's not always humans. In fact, increasingly we're getting a lot more of the animal spread ones. I've noticed in more recent years in movies and books and stuff. I think that's largely because people have become more and more aware of diseases spread by animals. Ebola, malaria, bird flu, swine flu, Nipah virus, Hendra. The list goes on. Nearly all the diseases we come in contact with come from animals at one stage or another. So and now that we know that, now that more people know that, that's kind of come up into our pop culture, and people tend to have a lot of animals involved now. Also because you can mutate animals in really cool ways if you're using one of those kind of viruses. I mean, has anyone played the Fallout series? Radiation does some really cool things to the animals in that. You get the two-headed bears, you get the crazy dogs, you get what are they?
He also makes
Does anyone remember the crabs, the Myla? Yeah, they shoot nastiness at you.
Well, that's actually pretty cool. It's got the ghouls, who are pretty much zombies.
Yeah, and ghouls
No.
I was considering talking about radiation, but Fallout's one of the few examples that gives you a real zombie-like creature from radiation. But also very interesting. I could go on about Fallout for a whole lecture and a half. Heck, I could do a course on it. A proper full lecture. Is there anything else? Okay.
Can I sign up for your course on Fallout?
you guys
popular
get fees
feature.
and charges?